how does faith show up? How does it show up in our organizations? What does it look like? I want us to first be known as the best cultures possible. And I think the best cultures possible are ones where leaders are leading from a place of love and joy, not fear and shame. And in order for that to happen, your leaders need to go through healing. They need to become more whole.
Welcome to the Faith Forward Leadership Podcast, where we talk with leaders about how they cultivate a higher purpose in their companies today and perpetuate it beyond their tenure. I am delighted to have Rusty Bland with us today. Rusty is the president of the KeHE Cares Foundation. KeHE is a $11 billion ESOP that's focused on natural and organic food distribution. Rusty, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here.
So I first learned about KeHE and about the great work you guys are doing from our friend Alan Barnhart, doing a workshop for the board of trustees for Barnhart companies. And they mentioned KeHE as a group that they were learning from. So naturally, I was curious to learn more, and it's been great to learn about what you all are doing. But before we get into all of that, I'd love to start with a little bit of the backstory. So talk to me about how you came to KeHE, how it got started, and how it's grown and evolved over the 20 plus years that you've been leading there.
Yeah, fantastic. Love the Barnhart group, by the way. They are just kindred spirits. And so that's been a real joy to work with really Jeff Latour more, and then the team around Barnhart that are doing such good work. But so my journey at KeHE started in 2004, which, for some listeners, they might not have been born yet. It's kind of crazy to start realizing that, but been there for a little over 20 years and was hired by Jerry KeHE. And at that time, Jerry was still president of KeHE and focused mainly on the Midwest, mainly on Chicagoland, which is where they started. It was about a $400 million company, one very large warehouse distribution center based in Chicagoland. And I was hired to come in and help them build an e-commerce business. And so we did that for about 4 years. Several of us were focused on that, a subsidiary, if you will, within KeHE. And about 2 years into that stint, Jerry decided to kind of step into the chairman of the board role and hired a new CEO to come in. The business was growing and the complexity was growing. And so the sense of a need for a more seasoned leadership team became very apparent. By that point, the company was already an ESOP.
Okay.
And really the question, I think it was about 2001, technically, when it became an ESOP. And I think the question for a lot of ESOP holders was, is this going to actually pan out? It seemed like a great idea, and it really was exciting, I think, for employees at that time. But that jury was still out on how KeHE was going to actually go, even though it already had scale at 400 million, from a family-owned business standpoint, transitioning to ESOP. But KeHE was beginning to really, really see growth, and the growth was so rapid that it was hurting the company. The company couldn't keep up their efficiencies and good practices, if you will, professional practices to make that growth actually pan out into profitability and into value creation. So new leadership team comes in at about, again, 4 years. For me being there, I was asked one morning after a group of us were praying, which is kind of interesting, a small group. And I still remember Karen Goodwin, when she prayed that God would move in HR. And an hour later, the CEO, who was not in the prayer group, called me into his office and said, "Rusty, I want you to take a job in HR."
Wow.
One of those things where for a marketer and someone, my profile was more like business development, if you will, and sales oriented. To be asked to move to HR wasn't the first thing on my list. Let's put it that way. And I kind of felt a little bit like Jonah getting the call to go to Nineveh. And, but, even I can discern in that scenario that that's how God works, is we pray and he equips, and sometimes he equips as we go, and sometimes he equips before we go, and sometimes, well after we go, but he sent me to HR for what I didn't understand at the time was going to be really kind of the journey of a lifetime for me and in my career. And so, that's 2008. And then, about 10 years later, I'm actually running HR, which is kind of this crazy journey for me personally. And that included mainly the culture side of the organization and how to steward the culture, how to grow the culture. And I learned really during that stint of going from being a brand, thinking about brand as a marketer. And when you think about brand, it's really what do consumers think about our product, if you will, or our company, our organization. And the shift that God did in me was how does the experience of work when people come in, how do they experience work? How do they think about work, frankly? And so I could see how God redeemed this passion for branding to really this passion for his kingdom manifesting and coming to employees of KeHE really is kind of the journey that I went on personally. During that time, KeHE, as you mentioned, is now in that $11 billion zip code and from 400 million at that time and really in the grocery industry. So KeHE serves consumer oriented facing grocery retailers across the US now. We have 18 different locations.
Wow.
And so we're about 5 hours away from any consumer in the continental US. And we do also have ways of getting product to Hawaii and to Alaska and also to the Caribbean. And so anyway, we're mainly focused in kind of these areas around the US and have thousands of retailers now, and we buy from thousands of suppliers, and so we have about $1 billion of really great food product in that what would be called the specialty, natural, fresh, organic marketplace.
Mhm.
That's where we serve. The company is an ESOP, as you mentioned. It gives away 10% of its net income. And
Wow.
those dollars come over to the foundation that now I lead. About 2 years ago, I pivoted from leading the HR culture function at KeHE over to running the foundation. And so that's
Mhm.
what I do day to day now. It's just been this blessing and journey of a lifetime for me, and so much learning and so many opportunities ahead, and so much to learn. So yeah, that's kind of the summary.
That's amazing. I love seeing how God kind of he equips the called in your journey and you were already there, you were already praying. And I want to get into the faith side of what you do, but before just like looking at the kind of I'll just call it the mechanics of KeHE. So you've got this ESOP, 10% is going to the foundation. Share with us a little bit about how the foundation and the business kind of work together in that ESOP structure and how anyone from the employee might experience to other groups that benefit from the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and that's evolved. I mean, it started out where the origin of generosity at KeHE is now kind of mythic and legendary. Where our KeHE, Jerry's dad would who started the business, he would know that somebody was struggling in the warehouse, and he'd meet them in the parking lot, shake their hand, and he'd have a $50 bill, $100 bill in his hand. He would want to want help people financially that were struggling, that he found out about that, and that began to evolve and grow as the company succeeded. And really, Jerry, to his credit, had this thought that he wanted employees who are really a main part of generating the profit. He wanted them to be as involved as possible in where the dollars and how the dollars were actually donated and given. And so as that 10% number, not that I think that anyone felt like the business was required biblically to tithe, if you will, but it just felt like a number, I think, to Jerry because of a tithe, that he wanted that to be the benchmark. Um, and so began this journey of framing in how to give and the kinds of organizations that would be given to, and then handed it off essentially to an employee-led committee that approves what now are grants going out. We do, a couple hundred grants a year to organizations all over the world. But the origin was very humble and kind of giving out of what you could give, if you will, as
Mhm.
is getting developed, and then eventually seeing that transition over to employees being the ones who are really driving the driving force. And the other kind of element that Jerry, he did so much to get us started, but he envisioned this being a highly relational process. And so
Mm.
relationships guide us very much. We prefer to start by serving and having employees involved in organizations that we give to. We would use phrases like we want to be proximate to the work or proximate to
Mhm.
suffering. And we feel like when we are that, that the dollars are given in a much more meaningful and targeted and using greater wisdom, I think,
Mhm.
and also greater humility where we want the partners that we're relationally working with to have the flexibility and really the authority to actually decide where dollars go.
Mhm.
We you know, you think about investing that we might do personally. People will often say, well, invest in what you know, invest you know, in terms of the relationships of the leaders that you know even, and you invest in leaders even before you invest in businesses oftentimes. And we feel similar about our giving is that we really want to know the leaders of these organizations. And so we tend to give towards smaller founder-led, even entrepreneurial organizations. And so we think about it in three ways is that we want to serve. That's kind of the first, our starting point is to serve. We then think about investing and then we think about equipping. And so
Mm.
those are the three main focus points, if you will, of activity that the foundation is involved in. And that involves kind of physical proximity. It involves leadership development. It involves obviously deploying dollars, both from a granting and an investing standpoint. But all of our activity comes back to these three buckets of serving, investing, and equipping.
Mhm.
So again started out very small, very, very, very humble. Now we have 37. We did 37 serving trips with KeHE employees in 2025, and so
Wow.
you know approaching about 400 employees last year. Over time, we've had almost 3,000 employees go on what we would describe as a multi-day serving experience. So where
Mm.
they had to pack a bag, they got on a plane, they went somewhere that was uncomfortable, usually, even if that's domestic, oftentimes taking a marketplace leader or individual into environments where you're serving marginalized and suffering individuals.
Mhm.
It's uncomfortable. And so that we do that in a safe way, but we do it with a disruptive mindset of saying,
Mhm.
we want you to grow. We want you to transform. And we know that transformation and change is uncomfortable by its nature because we're rejecting status quo, we're rejecting what was, and we're saying we want something more, we want something better. And again, it's a well-worn, many of us have experienced it as we serve. We've woven that together in the way that we actually develop our culture. Because
Mhm.
serving at KeHE is the number one experience besides work that our employees share as a common bond. And so
Mm.
we have comments frequently from our employees where they'll go to Honduras or they'll go to these organizations that we serve with in Laredo, Texas, or in Jacksonville, Florida.
Mhm.
And many employees have gone there. And so they feel like I'm taking part in this ritual, if you will, that many of our employees have also already taken part in. And what we hear back is, I had no idea. I heard about KeHE Cares. I heard about the giving that we do, but I went and I experienced it and I had no idea. And it's this transformative, again, experience that begins to shape and really challenge what they
Mhm.
believe about leadership, what they believe about KeHE and the potential for work to deliver deep meaning into the basic things of work, whether it be a journal entry or whether it be, you know, packing an order of food, going out to a retailer, whatever that job might be, that a much deeper meaning begins to form for employees around that as they serve. And
Mhm.
so serving is really in many ways the heartbeat of what I'd say is distinct about us. And then that flows into our investing and it flows into our equipping and it really informs it in so many ways. So that's just kind of a starting point, that this idea of serving, investing, equipping, and then the idea that serving is at scale has been such a critical part of shaping who KeHE is today.
Mhm. I love that focus on serving, and you see how that would naturally pour back into the company and the values that you have inside the organization. But I wanna just make sure I heard you said that 3,000 of your employees have been on these service experiences?
Yes. Yeah,
Wow.
we've had, again, it started when I talk to organizations or groups that maybe aren't really there yet. I really want to emphasize that we started with one. You know, we
Yes.
started with one trip and it had 5 people on it, you know. And some of us were doing that in our churches or in other ministries that we serve in. And we were having deep transformational experiences ourselves. And at least what I saw coming together for me was that God was putting me in these responsibilities of talent development and of culture development within the company. And so I was, on one hand, personally being very transformed and shaped by these intense, immersive serving experiences, and really saw the opportunities develop where we could bring the two together, where we could say, we want to develop the best. Let's use the words of the marketplace. We want the best athletes possible, right? We want to win in the areas where we're competing. We want to win. We're not doing it. We're developing a hobby. We actually have a business for profit. And as our finance team tells me often, Rusty, if there's no margin, there's no mission. And so we have that reality that we're not a church, that we aren't a ministry, we are a for-profit business. But then we were saying, well, so how do we make sure that our employees are who God's created them to be? They're flourishing, and our leaders, therefore, are whole, integrated, healthy individuals and leaders. And as we do this together, then you start seeing what you might describe as the best athlete possible, which I think the best athlete possible is a kingdom athlete who's bringing together skills and curiosity and tenacity and resilience and humility in these really kind of unique ways that then I think are a secret sauce, if you will, within the competitive landscape that we're all operating as businesses. We experimented with that at KeHE. We saw it. I've called it sometimes new wine because I really feel like the Spirit was leading us every step of the way. Now that I look back, and what emerged was just a different kind of company, if you will, and one that is hard to, as I think about mission drift, or I think about just the idea of staying on mission.
Mhm.
Scale is makes it difficult, frankly. And so these practices, these rhythms, making sure that we onboard new leaders into what these experiences have been serving, if you will. So yes, the scaled serving experience, I would say, is one of the top, if not the very top, shaping element of or a practice that we've seen make a difference at KeHE.
Mhm. Share with us a little bit more about, because it sounds like prayer was even part of what you all were doing early on in your time there. Share about kind of the faith journey of the organization in terms of the faith dimension of what was happening before you got there,
Yeah.
since you've been there.
Yeah. Well, Jerry and Art KeHE founded the business with what we now call the founding value of we thank and honor God in all we do. And but they didn't make that a requirement for employment at KeHE. They're competing in the grocery industry, in the food distribution space. And so to do that, we need to be excellent, certainly at the core disciplines of HR, finance, and operations, and IT, and all of the things it takes any business to operate. Add to that the supply chain, the food foraging, the food, if you will, category development work, all of the other things that go with that. So we have to be excellent in all of those things and attract the best and brightest talent. And we want cultural alignment as well. And so what's emerged is what I would describe as a mosaic of a makeup of our workforce. We're by no means a Christian company. We are a faith-founded company that operates with faith-friendly principles, is how we talk about it. And so this idea, for me anyway, of suddenly finding myself in a culture champion, kind of a job, if you will, of being a practitioner and a champion of the culture at KeHE. That was my task. When I went to work every day, if I measured my success, it was, well, what have I contributed to making KeHE a better and a more competitive culture? And so in one hand, I had this idea of thanking and honoring God in all we do. How does that show up? How do you operationalize that? And frankly, I would argue that ESOP is an example of how faith shows up, because now you're saying, I actually don't want to create wealth for two people or a handful of people. I'm actually taking the wealth creation opportunity that business affords, and I'm spreading it out throughout the entire organization. That's a very biblical principle in my mind, and that's a way that faith can manifest to do that well. But the other elements, for us, I would say there's a couple of main ones. Serving, we've talked about, because if you look at scripture and you look at this call of Jesus, even in Luke 4, saying that he came to do this Isaiah 61 mission, if you will,
Mhm.
of being anointed to bring good news to the poor. And that looked like physical healing and physical redemptive activities and this restoration of things that have been broken and have been, you know, sight being restored to the blind. It had all
Mhm.
these really, you can make those very specific examples, but I would argue they're also metaphorical for all of us as believers as we walk out this call of justice, that we are to be bringers of justice and this kingdom of this redemptive kingdom of restoration, back to Eden, back to the way it was, this garden image, if you will. And so, and I don't want to, I'm not trying to sidestep at all the faith conversation, but it was for us the calling for a few of us who were really, really bathing, bathing everything in prayer. I mean, doing prayer walks and blessing walks around our facilities. I mean, we sprinkled so much anointed oil around and still do, right? Around the perimeters of so many facilities. And so all of that was happening. But what I saw God do in addition to that, maybe from that, was he started involving all of his image bearers in this work. And so even people that maybe aren't stepping into church, they don't even understand this biblical mandate, they began understanding and really finding purpose and passion around this restorative, redemptive work, if you will, that we started saying, man, it feels like people are actually being the church, if you will, before they're actually going to church.
Mm.
And it was just kind of this really cool. And for some, that was the journey, maybe to church for the first time, or this return to faith that had been, for various reasons, had been broken in their lives, and that relationship had been we saw it become and continue to see this restored relationship with God happen as people are serving and doing this restorative work of the kingdom. And
Mm.
so, yes, I would say faith manifested has been about flourishing. It's been about John 10:10 and the work of abundant life in our employees' lives, in the lives of these marginalized communities where we go serve,
Mhm.
and in the lives of the partner organization that we're serving with and through. Those are
Mhm.
kind of the three communities that I think about quite a bit. That, again, we have these marketplace leaders and employees at KeHE, and they're going to serve in, let's say, a poor community in Honduras.
Mhm.
And we're doing that through Mission Lazarus, Honduras. And what we're seeing is that if we do this well, we do it relationally, we do it with this abundant mindset, and we see flourishing happening in all three of those, if you will, communities or individuals. So that's how faith has kind of shown up. Now, are Bible studies happening at KeHE? Absolutely, they absolutely do. We have a prayer call that happens every week with the whole company, and then we have lots of pods, if you will, that are organically happening. We've been big attenders of the Global Leadership Summit for
Mhm.
years and years and years. That's been a very meaningful part. And then, we have serving happening literally every month. And those are happening with organizations that are very faith focused. And, why that they're serving in Honduras, why they're serving in Laredo, Texas, or Jacksonville, Florida, or all these other areas, Nepal, Kathmandu. It's because of Jesus. And so as our people go and serve there and they ask these organizations, gosh, why are you serving here? That's a fun conversation for me to listen to, and one that I want to really shepherd and honor. But I know that oftentimes, and really mostly, that conversation isn't for me to have, because I feel really protective of this talent role that I have within the company. And I never want somebody to feel like they're getting an opportunity because of their faith. It's important that people get opportunities because of the quality of the work that they're doing in the industry that we're serving, the customers that we're serving. I think when you get those things mixed, people, I think things can get sideways quickly.
Sure, sure. Yeah, you do have to be really careful as you encourage people on their faith journey. and you are building the culture in the process. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about some of the impact you've seen, or we call them God stories that you've seen after, being at KeHE for over 20 years and taking these intentional steps to organize the service trips and recruit people to go on the service trips and figure out how that works with their other work that they have to do. It's a lot of effort to do all of this. So share a little bit about how you're seeing God show up in the midst of this.
Yeah, there's just so many there's so many stories. There's so many micro stories that aggregate to this bigger narrative that God's writing. And I think one of the things about being a follower of Jesus over time is when you see the changes that happen in people's lives. And that may be it when you go to church and you do life together with families and you see kids, or you see prodigals return, or you see, oftentimes the husband finally comes and turns his life around, or all this, life change. Life change tends to be one of the most powerful witnesses, if not the most powerful witness. And I've seen person after person move from a place of really even resistance to the idea of the things that we're doing that are more serving as traditionally thought of as like a mission, missionary work,
Hmm.
or church focused work. And so when we show up in these places and we're a group and people ask us, well, what church are you with? And we just kind of go, well, we're with a company or
Yeah.
for-profit company. And then
Right.
their minds start exploding because, wait, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And they maybe not be talking to a person who is a person of faith, because we're bringing people out into the field who they've been prepared for the experience, but they may or may not be a person of faith. And so it's a paradigm, again, that has been different for us to see how serving and then coming alongside, this question of faith, and seeing people that were resistant to it come to be just adamant supporters,
Hmm.
and across, all the way up to the C-suite, and then across different disciplines within the organization. So life change has been profound.
Hmm.
And I would say the other thing that we talk about frequently is leader wholeness.
Mm.
Something that I would do want to get into is this: what's formed from all of this is this goodness collective that
Hmm.
has recently launched. But one of the elements that's been foundational around why we even did that is this belief that if you want a kingdom honoring culture, that what I believe is number one on God's list is how we love people and how we show up for people.
Hmm.
And if you're a company of any size, what that means is that, and you're the owner, you have influence over leaders. You are now outsourcing the experience of your employees to somebody else, right? So consider a company of five, and it's you and I are our co-CEOs. We have five people in our organization below us. We have an immense amount of influence over their experience. And you and I would own that. We would just own it. But if you're at 50 or 100 at KeHE, there's about 9,000 employees.
Wow.
We have 750 people that are leading other people,
Hmm.
and growing. And that's probably a smaller number than actually it is today. So what that means, again, if it's at 50 employees, or even 20 employees, you as a founder that's passionate to see faith show up there, you have to have as your number one passion the way that these employees are cared for and treated as they come
Hmm.
into work every day, because that will be their kingdom experience. They often say that employees leave leaders before they leave a company.
Right.
And
Right.
again, you've now outsourced that experience to somebody else. And so the saying that really emerged for me is that culture is as leaders do. Culture is as leaders do. So if I want a kingdom culture, what it means is I'm relying on leaders to actually create that culture.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it from the platform of my town hall meetings as a CEO or a founder. I can't do it from a great PowerPoint deck or a good website. It has to be through the way our leaders lead. And so what we KeHE is we developed a trauma informed leadership program because we believed that leaders need to heal in order to be the best versions of themselves to then have the most flourishing, if you will, a culture possible.
Mhm.
Because broken leaders will lead in broken ways, but whole leaders that have become more healed, because I don't know this side of heaven that any of us are fully healed. We're not all ever all going to be all the way
Mm.
there, but to the extent that we can limit and even eliminate our trigger points, and the
Mhm.
two really main areas of focus for us were around fear and shame. So
Yeah.
if I had to say the number one message that I would want people to hear is that you need to be fear not leaders. You have to be. You have to be a fear not leader. Now, how many times was fear not said in the Bible? Some people say 365 times. AI doesn't agree with you, by the way. It's maybe 100 and 110, 115 is what I found. And still, the number one message, oftentimes of Jesus, who said of himself that he's humble and gentle of heart. His comment would be, fear not. And so, what often happens though is that we fear that we're going to miss our numbers. We fear that we're going to disappoint our board or our parents or ourselves, or we fear that we're going to lose our business altogether. And so, fear oftentimes drives us, it motivates us. And oftentimes, we as leaders use it as motivation to get performance out of our people. And
Mm.
my message would be, may it not be so amongst us.
Right.
May that not be true of us. You've heard it said, and you've seen how the Gentiles lord it over those that they lead, right? That's the right out of
Mhm.
scripture. So this call on us to be also apprentices of Jesus, who was gentle and humble of heart. The call is to lead from a place of love and joy. And I have a lot to say about that. We don't have enough time on today's podcast, but I would just say that this message of how does faith show up?
Mhm.
How does it show up in our organizations? What does it look like? I want us to first be known as the best cultures possible. And I think the best cultures possible are ones where leaders are leading from a place of love and joy, not fear and shame. And in
Mhm.
order for that to happen, your leaders need to go through healing. They need to become more whole. And so I think as again, founders, CEOs, people who have influence over people, leaders, we need to be passionate about this. This is something that I'd rather have this wake me up at night and get me out of bed at 2 a.m. because man, I got to work on that program
Mhm.
and make sure that the leaders who I'm outsourcing my culture to and the sheep that frankly I'm accountable for, the
Right.
care of them, that I'm actually making sure that the leaders that I've entrusted this to are equipped, that I'm loving on them, that I'm building into them in the best ways possible.
I love that emphasis on seeing people as whole people and also understanding that we're all broken, whether you're a follower of Christ or not, we're all broken and we all bring in that baggage to the workplace that we have from our upbringing, from our argument we had before work, from all of that. So that sensitivity, I have to ask, how did you all start developing this wholeness focused leadership program with that trauma informed lens? How did you guys come about this and this emphasis?
Well, I would say, to God be the glory for one, because it has felt that he's, as I said earlier, he's been one step ahead, leading us.
Mm.
And there, in this case, our CEO was in a small group, and that small group was going through materials that was focused on how to become the best version of yourself. How to really kind of, what does it look like for the John 10:10 abundant life to
Right.
be flowing out of you as a person? And as they were studying that, they got into kind of how biblical thinking, or biblical truth, that you need to be, have a renewed mind,
Mhm.
renewed transformed mind, and then as you do, you start understanding God's will for you in a more significant way. You go to Romans 12:1 and 2 and kind of think about how does that actually look from the lens of neuroscience today.
Mhm.
And what's fascinating is neuroscience has started to agree with these biblical principles of truth,
Mhm.
which, no surprise. And so we started out of this small group that our CEO was in. He asked if I would help lead our senior team through this 7-8 week study
Mhm.
that would lead us on this path towards being a more holistic team. that
Mm.
we as individuals would learn about our trauma, be able to talk about it, understand it, and then get some practical tools and tips to help people, kind of untrigger, if you will.
Yeah.
And so, hey, we know, Rusty, that you trigger frequently in these situations. And we love you, brother, but we're going to come around you and say, that's not the best version of you. And I'm in
Mm.
agreement. Like, no, I don't want to be that person. I want to be this person. So, even helping people identify what the best version of themselves looks like, and then start to identify what the lesser than best version. That was a very low confrontational and kind of unifying experience as a senior team. And so we went through this, and the senior team was just overwhelmed by our own personal growth, how we were changing. And we decided that every leader in the company needed to go through a training. And so I brought I had a leadership development team reporting to me, and I kind of brought them around this, being a whole person, thinking about like how Covey talked about it as well, Stephen Covey, and all the Covey materials around speed of trust.
Mhm.
And we thought that was such a, they had this mind, body, spirit kind of paradigm that, agrees again very fully with how scripture thinks about us in that same way. And so I brought a, kind of marketplace talent development team around these concepts, and we developed a training that we took about 1,000 of our people through. And again, coupled with the serving that we were doing, we saw this change start to get embedded. The language started to emerge when people
Mhm.
were able to talk about things like best versions of themselves, or even kind of get into areas of personal trauma that normally is taboo at work. We, for us, it became kind of a safer place for people to say, no, we want you to be able to heal, and we're not expecting you to be perfect. We expect you to be on the journey. We expect you to be in this transformational process, because we're all going for something better, if you will. And so as that came from the very top of the organization, it was really amazing to see the way that really kind of transformed us at a very critical season. We were struggling as a company. We had just acquired a very large competitor, and the competitor was different enough from us that the
Mm.
process of putting these two companies together, in fact, finding the synergies and finding the points of integration, were not going well.
Yeah.
And we kind of doubled down on more of a surrender posture, and God really honored that in incredible ways. Really, really, and the blessing that we saw financially. I'm not saying that that's not always how God's kingdom flows in that way. I'm not a prosperity theology person, gosh, in any way. Yet I can testify to almost a repentant spirit, if you will, and a spirit of lowliness that end up producing a multiplier effect on results that continues to flow even, I think, to today in the company. So yeah,
That's
really
amazing.
neat story.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I love seeing how I think this story is a great example of how what our personal abiding, in this case, the CEO and the leadership team, you all abiding influence the business because as God was teaching you outside the company, it influenced what you did inside the company and following that nudge from the Lord to, hey, what would this look like to do with the leadership team and how might we scale this and now scale this with acquired companies whose culture is going to be really different and how do we just promote that wholeness? I love seeing how God speaks to one and it can influence the whole business.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, I think. And I do think people at times will shy away from having conversations around wholeness and having conversations around vulnerability because they fear the performance will tank in the business. And I do think that there is a caution point where we don't want to create a country club. That's not what we're developing. We're not we are This isn't a kind of a lazy river kind of thing where you're jumping on rafts, you're floating around. It's there's intensity, particularly when we think about the purpose around our work and how when we create more profits, we're transforming and saving lives all over the world. And if our profits are lower, we're unable to do the amount of work that we would like to do. And so there's a direct correlation to people in great need that we just can't be lazy about the
Yeah.
efforts.
Right?
And so I do want to acknowledge that that can be, if you're not holding in your hand two things at the same time of the flourishing of your people as the goal and high performance. And
Mhm.
those are not incongruous concepts, but they can get out of balance. And you can let high performance drive you and be an identity creator. That can happen in the church. That can happen in your life personally. It can happen in our homes where it's performance, performance, performance
Mhm.
of the word abiding. And I think also kind of this idea that flourishing is a byproduct of abiding. I think
Mm.
we want to bear much fruit at the vine. We can do nothing. And so
Right.
this abiding and this flourishing, if you will, and high performance are things that I think are very congruous. And I think they're at times they're linked directly.
Mm.
You could say flourishing is fruit. You could also say performance is fruit. And you could kind of do the opposite around, kind of this abiding spirit moving at the pace of Jesus is something
Mm.
that I want to frequently kind of own myself and ask myself and hold myself accountable to that. But yes, I do think that people can fear the notion of abiding or even of emotional intelligence or of wholeness because they fear the loss of performance. And I think the opposite is true. I think if you're not abiding, performance can still happen, but it's shorter term. It has always going to have negative consequences to it, fallout, if you will.
Mhm.
And oftentimes it's people that get hurt, steamrolled or burnt out or flame out or a number of other situations that we see so frequently now in the marketplace. You see it in ministries. And so, how to do this in an abiding way is it's everything, frankly.
Mhm. That's so good. You did mention the Goodness Collective, and I wanna give you a chance to share a little bit more about the work you're doing there.
Yeah. So we we saw this new wine we feel like being poured out at KeHE, and we felt like this is something new that's happening when we're putting together serving and trauma informed leadership and generosity and seeing how generosity is shared and not just with a few but shared across our organization. And then really kind of the wrapper is also this idea of caring for employees. And so we saw that shape KeHE, and we saw many things that we experienced and we engaged in were more common, if you will, and important. We engaged with the table group and with Patrick Lencioni, and that work was very foundational for KeHE. I mentioned Covey and the speed of trust and four disciplines of execution and other concepts around Covey were huge. And but we said, okay, those guys are doing that work. But what was unique about KeHE that maybe if we actually brought some of that work into the foundation, that we could give away to other organizations? And that was a bit of an exploration exercise, talking to other companies and saying, hey, can we help you? And then also receive help from them. And so, because we want to get better, we want to be the best kingdom oriented organization that we can. And what emerged were four areas of practice that became a framework that over time we felt like the framework was less about KeHE coming onto the scene with all of the knowledge
Mhm.
and hey, if we do this well, everyone can be like us, be like us.
Right.
Instead, it was, wow, like he's poured new wine out in lots of places.
Mhm.
And what if we formed a collective that, as we aggregated that learning around the framework of four areas of practice, it became this collective knowledge base and this ginormous encouragement circle and learning community. And so that's recently been named the Goodness Collective. Because if you think about the idea of God's nature, one of the terms that I think maybe describe, and he describes himself, he says like all my goodness, he talks to Moses with those terms, like all of my goodness. There's a sense of Yahweh and of the great I am, and it's wrapped into this idea of goodness that is flowing towards us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so I love the phrase goodness. I love that word. And because it takes lots of forms and shapes. But it all comes back to honoring and glorifying God, who is the the source of goodness, of all goodness. He's the source.
Mhm.
And so the Goodness Collective is a collective of culture shaping leaders that are in the marketplace, motivated by faith in Jesus and dedicated to flourishing in our organizations and the world.
Mhm.
That's the purpose of the collective. Around 80 to 85 organizations that are beginning to contribute to the conversation. They're sharing resources, and the as I said, the framework that's formed are these four areas of practice. The practice one is giving and wanting to become and wanting to over time learn how do I of using my resources well as an organization, as a business. How do I do it best in class? Because you can give a $50, you know, write a check to the organization of your choice, or you
Mhm.
can give half of your profits or a ginormous amount of your profits. But that doesn't necessarily describe what the best in class looks like. There's all kinds of resources like When Helping Hurts and Toxic Charity and others, right? Many like resources that you've actually written to think about how do we give in a way that's truly honoring what God's done in our organization. In our case, one of the big indicators is how involved are the employees in the giving. We think that that's an indication that we've created a good framework, good governance, and we've said it's not about me as the owner and founder. It's about all of us collectively, and particularly when employees are coming in every day, they're giving the best hours of their day, frankly, to create profit. Shouldn't they be involved? And maybe the transformation and flourishing that for them is actually involved in the giving. There's a good giving, and there's better giving, and then there's best giving, if you will. So
Mhm.
we want to create kind of a full, bright maturity mindset in every area of practice. So giving is practice area number one, serving.
Mm.
Practice area number two, employee care is practice area number three, and then leader wholeness is
Mm.
practice area number four. And so we have a framework. It has, um, we've developed assessments. We're really trying to build around those four areas. How can we serve members of the collective? How can we allow the collective goodness and knowledge that's taken place and is taking place in all these member organizations? How do we best create almost a marketplace and kind of events and opportunities for learning to happen, for relationship and community to form?
Mhm.
And so we're about a year into this now.
Mhm.
Last year, we had our first goodness gathering in Memphis, and the Barnhart organization hosted us. Awesome, awesome experience. We had about 15 companies were there, and that was a great, kind of origin group, if you will. This last 2 weeks ago in February, we had our second annual gathering. It was in Houston, hosted by Refined Technology Incorporated, RTI, and RTI hosted us. Amazing organization there. And we had about 35 organizations
Great.
that were a part of it. And so the collective overall, it has about, let's say, 100 plus thousand employees that are represented,
Wow.
and it's growing. And there's no fee to join. It's really just kind of about aligning around this mission and wanting to grow and wanting to be a good practitioner within these four areas of practice.
So where can, business leaders who care deeply about the faith and a lot of the topics you've talked about, where could they go to learn more about the Goodness Collective?
Yes, thank you for asking. Goodnesscollective.org.
There you go.
Goodnesscollective.org, and it's essentially a landing page to inform people of what's happening, what is the Goodness Collective, and then there's a Goodness Hub, and the
Mhm.
hub is really where all the resources are being shared, and that's
Mm.
going to be one where we have a short intake, ask
Sure.
you a few questions just to make sure that really the membership is for practitioners,
Mhm.
and we don't want people to just kind of jump in and start, if you will, selling trade, or we don't want it to be a marketplace per se. We want it to be a marketplace of ideas and of
Mhm.
relationships and of community. And so there's a bit of a guardianship to that. But if they go to the goodnesscollective.org website, they go to the hub, that's really where there's a directory with all of the organizations that are starting to come there. If you have a question around one of the areas of practice or some of the things that, hey, I want to learn about serving, or I want to learn about second chance hiring, or I want to learn about great employee benevolence programs, you can do a search, and you might have a member who has done a podcast on it, or who has a program or a resource that they've uploaded. You can get access to the resource, to videos, to the people who you want to reach out to and go, hey, I'm trying to build this. Can I have a phone call with you? I think over time, resources will be great. But once I've downloaded everything, I downloaded everything. Now I've got it. What's the value? I think the value over time is going to be relationships.
Sure.
I think what we've seen so far is that when people join, they frequently will say, I didn't know actually that there's so many other people that are trying to do the same thing that I'm trying to
Hmm.
do. Like, these are my people.
Yes.
That's the phrase. These are my people. Like, I feel like I'm home. Like, gosh, I know for me, if I would have had this 15 years ago, Becca, like I get emotional. I mean, when you're pushing what feels like a flywheel, and you're waking up every day, you're praying in the middle of the night, like you are, you're like a deer pants for water. Like that's you. Like you feel like, why is my soul downcast? I know I'm called to push this because it's for the Lord. It's what He's done in me, and I want to honor Him. And you think you're alone. And when you can come to a group that's with you, and they're excited to actually lean in with you and to hold your hands up and to help you as you go on your journey. It's powerful. And I think over time, I know for me, it's going to be the number one thing, even though, hey, the resource and the learning is awesome. We're committed to making it better and better and better. Um, but I think the relationships are why people will stay. And I'm excited that we're a community that worships, we're a community that is praise, and we're a community that really wants to be unified in this common mission to see Jesus glorified in the work that we're doing.
Hmm. Yeah, and we definitely need each other on this.
Amen. Amen. So yeah, go to the Goodness Collective. I say the Goodness Collective. Go to goodnesscollective.org
Uh-huh.
and get started, and reach out to me or Paul Reichert. Paul Reichert actually heads the KeHE Leadership Academy. And I'll say this, KeHE's been catalytic. We are still providing a lot of wind to the sails of this organization, but there's no reason that the Goodness Collective won't be 1,000 organizations at some point, because there isn't a company that shouldn't be involved. If you're a faith-minded, faith-forward leader, and you're wanting faith to show up inside your organization, then this is for you.
Hmm.
There's information here that will help. It's free of charge. There's a community here that is doing some of the same things that you are in the same ways. And so that therefore there'll be a lot of people that will come. And we believe over time that KeHE is the maybe the launch pad,
Hmm.
and we want to be participants. We're already benefactors of wisdom from many of the organizations like Barnhart, like RTI, like others who are doing this incredible work. And so, for us, we feel like we built it for ourselves, maybe like, hey, we now have people that we can hang out with and learn from and grow with. But I think over time, an organization will need to actually probably grow around this, because it's gonna need more hand holding. It's gonna have more people to touch. And so we'll just, we'll be watching the Spirit, and just joining Him in that work, and be obedient when that time comes. But
Hmm.
it's not about KeHE, I guess is what I want to say. It's about
Sure.
KeHE being the maybe the catalyst, but really this is about the Lord doing a movement, creating a movement,
Right.
of maybe a different way of doing business.
Hmm.
We hear about business can be a force for good. That's, the B Corp was started with that idea in mind.
Hmm.
And this is certainly along that same lines, but it's got a very kingdom, God honoring lens about it. I've joked sometimes that maybe someday there'll be, like, instead of a B Corp, maybe there'll be a G Corp, a Goodness Corp. That might be something that, hey, we want this to mark us, that we actually are a Goodness Corp, and we're striving to be the best organization we can be. And these areas of practice then become very helpful in how we hold ourselves accountable.
Right. I love that you made it so practical and you're working to get those resources out free of charge, no less. So businesses of any size can access these resources. Thank you all for doing
Yes.
that. I just think it's one of those things that makes you all exceptional. And I want to step back a second because you've given, 20 plus years of your life to this company to do this work. When you look ahead to KeHE, the KeHE Foundation, and the legacy that what you hope will be true for the organization 20, 30, 50 years from now, what does that look like from where you sit?
Yeah, it has been a journey. And many very wise, godly people have been significant contributors in their availability, their obedience to where we are now as an organization. And so it certainly by no means has been about me, but my only lens that I have is really my journey and looking out of my eyes and considering what God's done in my life
Mhm.
and what I've seen him do from the availability and the obedience, mine or of many. And yes, God has changed me dramatically through the work at KeHE, and so rhythms have changed in my life, and moving from the rapid, kind of reality of running HR and where you're just on every minute, and there's just, your inbox, you'll never catch up, and all of those kind of things, and to running a foundation that runs at a bit of a different pace. It's really more of a ministry team that's embedded within KeHE, frankly. We
Mhm.
do see KeHE as our ministry
Mhm.
clearly. Like our team is my team and I. We meet together to pray several times a week, and we're praying for the business. We're praying for the leaders of the business. We're petitioning. We're going before. We're inviting. And my hope and what I feel like God's been calling me to do. I'm 60 now, and this recognition that I'm excited, and I'm excited for the work, and I'm passionate, and there's just so much opportunity. And so there's no sense of this immediate retirement, kind of mindset for me personally. But I do feel clearly that there's this window to get a base, a foundation, a strong kind of governance and
Mhm.
practices and rhythms in place so that you give yourself the best opportunity for this continuity of what God has done and been doing. And even actually, not just a maintaining, I think we have a lot of things on our minds and hearts that are better yet, right? They're
Mhm.
innovation. They're like, no, there's this continuing way of co-creating with God Himself that we feel like we have a season ahead of us. And again, if we structure this right, this ongoing season of refreshment from the Lord, of creating with the Lord and seeing Him do new and wondrous things in our midst. And so the task on me right now is putting in place amazing governance principles at the KeHE Cares board level
Mhm.
and practices within my team to make sure that my team is never going before the pillar of fire and the cloud, that we're watching the spirit and we're keeping in step with the spirit. I've had this long standing tendency of getting a word from the Lord and then sprinting and really kind of losing sight of the Lord. And I realize too late that he's behind me. He's stopped a long time ago. Like, "Oh, you wanted me to go back there and pause." And so just kind of having rhythms of abiding, of building those practices and rhythms into the way that we do the work that we do. I had a really formative call with the spiritual formation leader at IJM,
Mm.
and I'm such an admirer of IJM, and they go into just the darkest places in the world, and how do they do that in a way that they don't burn out and they don't just immediately get serving and trauma fatigue, if you will, and what they said is they're more monastic about how they do the work they do. They consider themselves almost an order of monks, if you will, in terms of the rhythms. And that's been so informative for me, and one that we are continuing to lean into and consider how that might look as we engage in the marketplace, as we engage with high performance, best athletes as a mindset, but also doing that in a way that is embracing silence and embracing the need for rhythms of shalom and of Sabbathing and of being followers of Jesus in every way. So that's part of it. Is like, the word God gave me was really more around how Paul talked about his ministry. He said that, I'm planting, Apollos is watering, but neither of us are
Mhm.
anything. God makes it grow. Jesus told that parable about the sower, and the sower doesn't even know how the seed grows. And the
Mhm.
sower actually goes to sleep and then wakes up, and there's the shoot, looking for the shoot, but not just, focused on it, like knowing that, hey, my job is to sow the seed
Mhm.
and then to harvest the growth. And
Mhm.
so understanding that and trying to be true to that in how we do this work is also a big part of my kind of current focus. Because again, if we do this well, what
Mhm.
you then have, if you step back and you look at KeHE, you have their goal now is a $20 billion for-profit organization, right? Its ownership would be ESOP. It may not always be right today. It's 100% ESOP. That's going to be hard for them from a capital base standpoint to probably always remain that. We've had private equity investors in the past. That would not be something that would be out of the realm of possibility just for the health of the business long term. So $20 billion, you have an ESOP, though, majority owner and trustee and all the governance around that. And then you also have this tiny little, relatively speaking, a foundation where KeHE's giving 10% of its net income, and that foundation is being asked to steward those resources, and they're focusing on serving, investing, and equipping. And so part of who they're serving with, a big part is with all the KeHE employees. So over time, KeHE never loses its focus that we're an organization that gives and we
Mhm.
give generously. We're an organization that serves, and we serve radically, and we serve the least of these, and we pour ourselves out for them, and we go with curiosity and humility. And so we serve, and we also care for our employees in ways that they might flourish and they might experience wholeness. And the pathway to do that is to have whole leaders. And so
Mhm.
again, you kind of point back to the collective, because over time, the collective will actually serve KeHE. And again, the way we're thinking about it is really around this idea of systems and institutionalizing your culture so that it's not about a personality, or it's not about Rusty at all, for sure. It's not about Brandon, our former CEO and our current board chair. It's not about Deb Conklin, our current CEO. It's about this idea that they've wired that up into every, sinew of the organization so that people kind of say, well, this is just the air we breathe. This is who we are.
Yeah.
And so we're not there yet. And I don't know that we'll ever be there per se, but that's the work that I feel like God's putting on my heart and in front of me over the next several years, is
Mhm.
continue doing all of that wire in the walls work that frankly sometimes isn't very sexy. It's not as splashy as, hey, I wrote a big check and I used my funds, to do that. But it is lasting. There are some really good heroes of the faith that have gone before us that we can study and learn from. And that's what we're intending to do. And we want to, again, be faithful to what God's done in our viewing, and give testimony to that so that we can also become one of those faithful stewards of his goodness.
Amen. Amen to that. Thank you for sharing that. And as we wrap up today, I'd love to hear what are maybe some parting advice as you look back on your own leadership journey and where the Lord's even led KeHE and KeHE Cares today, just for that leader who's maybe earlier on that journey of what it looks like to integrate their faith at work or bring their faith to work and
Yeah.
encourage others. What would you share with them?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And I think I'll come back to maybe something that I commented on earlier, because I think sometimes when you hear about KeHE's current state, the size of the company, the fact that there's all these structural support systems like an ESOP that's already been founded and now is, as well as into its 25th year or so, highly successful, have created many, many millionaires, frankly, that are hourly employees. And so, all this great success, right? That people go, oh, well, that's KeHE, that's Chick-fil-A, or that's
Mhm.
not that we're even in their same breath, but that's some very mature organization that's well down the road. There's always an origin story, and I want people to be encouraged that if you have this spark and this passion to see God show up in your work, and for your faith to matter in every area of your life, not just where you serve at church or in your small group or in ministries you serve in, but in where you're in the marketplace and you're building something. That I just want to encourage you to start small and show up and have a long obedience in the same direction. Don't think about it in terms of, oh, I've got to have every employee, or I've got to have, and fill in the blank with the kind of numbers and the scale and all of that. We started small, and KeHE, when I started, was not a very good culture to work in. It was dark. It was really hard. I really had personal seasons of wilderness with the Lord saying, "Why did you call me here?" Like,
Mm,
I'm waiting for you to call me out. Like, I knew he called me in, and I was wrestling with him because I wanted to leave. And he was clear, like, no, it's not time for you to leave. And so now I look back and I go, wow, what I would have missed out on had I left. So I just want to encourage that sense of showing up over and over and over and over again for what is right and what is good, and use examples of companies like KeHE not as a discouragement, but as an encouragement, that
mhm,
as you do these incremental things. And I would add on to that a phrase that I've been using recently that I think is kind of humorous, is be okay to be the mosquito in the tent. And
mm,
if you've ever been camping or been in a place where mosquitoes get into your room and you're trying to sleep and they're buzzing around your ear, it's the worst. You can't sleep, right? You can't get rest. You'll do everything in your power to get that mosquito and to deal with it, contend with it. And the Lord has examples of that too. Be the one pounding on the door of the judge, and be
mm. Yeah.
I think there's a sense that God has put in each of us a word, and we know He's created us with a purpose for a purpose. Ephesians 2 gives us great language around that, but it's like we know that He put the world together. He gave a work for you and me to do, and in regard to the kingdom, in regard to bringing His goodness to the world. And so don't shy away from that, even if again it feels like you're not getting traction and it
Mhm,
feels like you're alone and it's another day of pushing it. I'm just saying to you that I think that's every ministry ever. Every ministry ever. Think about the times that Jesus was like, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I've longed to gather you. I mean, I think the call on us to follow Jesus is one where we might feel discouraged. And so I want to just give people this message of don't lose heart, that there
mhm,
is an eternal weight of glory that is happening in the spiritual realms that we don't even
mhm,
fully understand, and it's worthy. It is worthy of the sacrifice and of the work. And yes, do it, but in a healthy way. Do it with rhythms of grace and with rhythms of rest and shalom. But then you come back after that day of rest and you're back at it again. And I just again stay at it. I think be okay to start small. Do one serving trip. I happen to believe that serving, giving, employee care, and leader wholeness is an amazing framework to operate from.
mhm.
So if you don't have a framework, use it. Use it today.
Start
Um,
there.
Small, and don't stop. Keep going. Keep
That's
going.
great. I'm hearing from you, really be seeking the Lord for that word and what He's calling you to do. I think that's so important because I've given talks on mission drift and had mid-level leaders of the organization say, like,
Right.
I'm concerned about drift. I'm concerned for where my
Right.
my nonprofit's going and things like that. Their questions, so what should I do? I'm like, well, I'm certainly not going to give you the answer that you need to be praying to the Lord because He may be calling you to stay and fight for it,
Yes.
or maybe He's calling you to lead well from a kingdom perspective somewhere else. I don't know the answer to that, but always seeking the Lord first. And I love the practical advice you're giving. Just starting small, just seek the Lord, try to just sense where the Spirit is leading and start small there and see what God does.
Amen. In that, it's for you and your transformation and your greater amounts of Jesus and less amount of you, that
Mhm,
journey that you're on. And so it's for you. He will use he'll redeem that in your life as you let him, as you surrender that to him. And the other thing is, think about the people of Israel who didn't go into the promised land. There's a sense that sometimes we think, oh, well, God will do this or not do it. It doesn't matter what I do. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's a biblical truth. I think God's given us a work to do. And if we do not do it, it might not happen,
mm,
right? It might not happen at your company. And so if you're in a mid level role, or even I was in a role reporting to the head of HR. And I just say this for encouragement, but there were many times where I needed to be the mosquito in the tent. I needed
Mm,
to risk my own career capital and thoughtfully, prayerfully, kindly, lovingly make the case and make it over and over and over again and not go away on some topics. Hey, I already
mhm.
told you no, Rusty. I understand, but remember, I'm a sales guy. So
Yeah.
what I heard is you need more information from me. What I heard is you just didn't get enough of the features, advantages, and benefits of
Huh?
what needs to happen here. And so, at times I think that's true about many of us, where we need to kind of develop the resilience to be influencers from the middle and
Mhm.
influence up and sideways in every which way that God allows. Because think about the times over and over and over again that God would just say, look, I'm going to go before you. I know they're bigger than you. I know they have more title and more this and that, but we're not fighting against flesh and blood, right? This
Mm.
isn't a war about what's seen. This is the unseen areas that we're trying to actually advance. And so God goes before us, and I think we can take heart in that and don't let the immediate results that our eyes can see be that which drives your motivation and your behaviors.
So good. Well, I think we can all take encouragement from this. And I love just seeing how along your journey, God has gifted and equipped you to do this work from the sales experience, leveraging that in your HR experience, and now leading the foundation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today, for sharing what God's been teaching you along the journey. I think many, including myself, will be blessed by it. So thank you so much, Rusty.
Praise God. Yeah, thank you, Becca, for what you're doing. And it's just exciting to think about all the ways that, you're going to impact so many companies. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this was helpful in your leadership journey. On behalf of On Mission Advisors, if there's anything we can do to help you better define, protect, and champion what matters most in your company, please reach out and contact us. We'd be happy to help you as well. Until next time.